Hey everyone, Julian here, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make some cool future beats type of music. So, as usual, you can get the project file and samples from this video in the description on my Bandcamp for just $5. It's the first link, you can't miss it. If you want to support me, it's a great way to do it. If you want to get the project file from this video, there's also a great way to do it. And yeah, let's dive in. So, the first layer I'm going to be showing you is this little kind of pad thing from the intro. It sounds like this. So, the way I made this, it's pretty simple. Basically, I just have some basic major and minor 7th chords here. So you can see we have a C sharp major 7, a D minor 7, and then an F minor 7. Or F minor 7th, however you want to say it. But yeah, so these are just basic major and minor 7th chords. Pretty straightforward there. And then I added these extra voices on top. So the point of these extra voices is they kind of like accentuate the mood that you're going for. Like the major and minor 7th chords, the thing about them is they're a very good way to give your track like a distinct kind of feel or like a distinct kind of mood. But sometimes you gotta add a little bit of extra voices on top to really like convey what you're trying to get across. And so that was what I did here. And you can hear they just kind of make it a little bit more tense. When I turn them off, it's a little bit more, it has that same feel, but again, these just really bring out, like I said, that kind of like mood that I was going for. So for the synth sound here, all I have is 2 saw waves going into a filter. I automated the frequency, so that's why we're getting that. It's just a low-pass filter. And then I have a little bit of vibrato here and a little bit of unison with the voices turned up to 4 and the delay turned up to 6 milliseconds. So that's what's giving it that kind of like warbly, like lo-fi-ish kind of sound. If I turn those off, it's kind of dry sounding, but there we go. So the next layer I will show you is this little riser, which sounds like this. And so the way I made this is actually very easy and simple. Basically what I did was I just took a sine wave. I put it in, or a sine wave and operator. I put in one note. I made it a C sharp. I don't think it really matters with a riser since it's pitching up. And ideally it's just going to be chromatic anyway. But I always like to put it on the root note of the key. So that's what I did because we're in C sharp. And yeah, so then all I did was basically, I put this LFO on the pitch inside of operator, so you can see it's just going to these oscillators and it's controlling the pitch. And I have it on a saw wave with the amount there, and then I'm automating the rate, so that's how you get that kind of like that weird kind of sound. So then on top of that, I have this frequency shifter, which I'm also automating the fine pitch or fine frequency, I guess. And that's what's giving it the pitch rise. If I turn that off, it's just that thing speeding up. So, yeah, and then I have this utility here, which this is actually pretty important when you make, like, risers, because you don't want them to just start like this. I mean, I guess in this, that does kind of work, but it's much better if you just have it going gradually. So that's what I did. I just automated the volume there. And then I have an auto pan on there, which is just giving it a little bit of an auto panning effect and kind of helping to bring it to life. So the next thing I have here are these chords which play in the drop, and they sound like this. So these are pretty simple. I just took the main chords that I showed you before and gave them this little pattern. And then what we have is I have an analog here with 1 saw wave, a little bit of white noise, and then it's going into a low-pass filter which has an envelope on it, which is set like this, so we got a little bit of attack. Really not too much decay. And yeah, it's just like a quick kind of like, just a sound like that. So then after that, I have that going into the vibrato on analog, and then that is going into a chorus, which is set this way. It's very subtle, it's just helping to give it a little bit of stereo width, and then I have that going into a reverb, which is, again, set very subtly. It just gives it kind of a sense of like a room and, yeah, a little bit more space in the sound. And then I just have that going into a compressor, which is sidechaining into the kick, and then an EQ8 to cut out the low end. So this is a pretty simple layer. like I said, just kind of the saw wave going into the filter. So the next thing I have here is this bass, which sounds like this. So this is pretty simple. It's just playing the root notes. It's the same pattern, like rhythmically, as those last chords, so it's all going to be really tight and kind of synced up sounding. And yeah, this is just a really simple sound I made with analog. It's a square wave, a little bit of white noise, going into a filter, which has an envelope set like this, so a little bit more of a pluck than that last one. That's going to the vibrato a little bit as well. I really like using the analog vibrato because it just gives your sounds like, that kind of, like I was saying, like lo-fi texture, like a little bit more of like a warbly kind of futuristic sound. And then I have that going into a saturator, which is set like this, so I'll show you. You can see the saturator is really just giving it a little bit of beef on top of the sound, but it is adding a little bit of extra harmonic content as well. And yeah, it's just, to give it a little bit more grit. So the way I set this was I turned up the drive a bit, and then I used this analog clip down here to kind of shape the sound a little bit. And then I just have that being sidechained to the kick. So the next layer here is this ARP, which sounds like this. So the way I made this was I took the chords and I didn't give them any kind of rhythm like the way I chopped them up for the chord synth and the bass synth in the drop. I just have them playing through straight because we have this arpeggiator here just doing 16th notes. Honestly, this is like I did not do a lot with the arpeggiator, but it really didn't need it. I just kind of have that on there to arpeggiate those chords, and this layer just adds a little bit of extra kind of like interest on top of it. Like it just kind of gives it a little bit more sauce, I feel like if I play it without this is cool, but this is a lot cooler. So yeah, this is a pretty easy sound to make. It's just a sine wave and a square wave in analog. I detune the square wave a ton to kind of make it a little bit more sort of weird sounding, like that's with no detune. And you can hear that detune just kind of gives the sound like a more interesting feel. And a little bit like, it kind of makes it feel like it's falling apart a little bit more as well. Because of course, obviously, it is sort of, it's kind of out of tune with the sine wave. So it's giving it a more chaotic sound that's interesting and cool and has a lot of texture and feel to it that you can kind of play with. So I have that going into a low pass filter with an envelope. And then I have that going into some vibrato. And then after that, I have a reverb, which is pretty subtle. It's very similar to that chord synth vibrato or reverb, where it's just like a really short one just to give it some space. And then I have the being sidechained to the kick. So the next thing I will show you are the drums. So the drums on their own sound like this in the drop. So the way I made these was I kind of started with the kick and this main clap here. And then I just built everything on top of that. So these kind of drums, they're not super detailed or super difficult, but they can seem a little daunting, I know, especially if you haven't got a lot of experience producing this style. And all I can say is do sort of what I'm saying here. Like start with your kick and your clap or your snare or whatever, and build stuff on top of that, because that's really the foundation. So for the kick, the way I have it is I just have this simple kick sample. I didn't really have to do too much processing to it because it already had the sound I wanted. It's just a nice punchy kick that's gonna, really cut through this mix. And then as far as the way I programmed it, I did do a little bit of kind of weird stuff. Like I moved some of these notes around. It has a bit of swing here and there. Some of the eighth notes are off the grid, like this one. You can see if I zoom in. So yeah, you just kind of want to put in these kind of patterns that are very like free and just open, and you don't want to stick too much to the grid. Like you want to obviously be around the grid. You don't want to just have random notes. You still have to fit into like quarter notes and eighth notes and 16th notes to some degree, but you want to play around within that framework and try to get things that are like, you still want to be able to like count the beat, but taking notes off the grid like that really, really helps. And then the clap also sort of shows this because we have it's a little bit off the grid. You can see I have it pulled back a little bit from being exactly on the beat. So yeah, like definitely taking things off the grid like that is a really great thing to do. So the next thing I'll show you these hand claps. So I have these on here, and they're just kind of layered under the main clap. And you can hear it's 4 different samples. So this is something very, very important that I actually wanted to talk about in this video, is when you're doing like hand claps like this, and I'll play it with the main clap while I'm saying this, you never want to use the same clap twice. I mean, you can, like, it really doesn't matter too much, I guess, if you really get down to it, but if you really want it to sound, like, organic and real and give it that kind of human, feel to it, you gotta use different samples. So that's what I did here. I have 4 different hand clap samples. And then they play over this main clap. So we kind of have these adding a little bit of texture, and then the main clap is like the punch. That's the one that's like cutting through, that's like sort of almost like a crack kind of sound. So yeah, that's how I did those claps. And I think the claps are very important for the style, so I wanted to take a bit of time to talk about those. But yeah, after that, I just have this snare. It's pretty simple. I mean, it's just giving a little bit of like kind of punctuation, I guess. Really, this is just something that's very kind of like based on your track and how you're working on it and all that. But in my case, this fit into here. And yeah, I just got that short little punchy snare. So the last 2 things here are the shaker and these hi-hats. So the shaker is pretty simple. It's just a nice kind of organic shaker loop. I want to put this in there to just kind of give it some extra percussion and give it like a more human layer. Like, a lot of this is programmed, and it's programmed to sound realistic, but ultimately you can only get so close. So adding in like a shaker loop like this really helps. So yeah, and then I have the hi-hats. So how I made these hi-hats, basically what I did was I took these different live drum samples and I put them into a drum rack, and I made this kind of pattern. So you can hear there are a lot of notes off the grid, a lot of notes just kind of like, I played around with the velocities a lot. And yeah, there's just a lot of swing. And it's a very open and like free kind of pattern. And it's similar to the kick and really everything in this music. Like, you really want it to be very like I said, like free and open feeling. So that's how I did this. And then one thing you may notice is every open hi-hat closes almost immediately. Like, you can hear it kind of goes like that. The reason for that is because if you look here, I have the choke on all of these set to 1. So what this choke does is basically it says whenever you play another one of these pads in the drum rack, whichever one was playing right before it is going to be immediately muted. So this is really useful when we're doing live hi-hats, because obviously you may know when you play a live hi-hat, you can't play it open and closed at the same time. It's either open or it's closed, and if you want to play a closed hit right after an open one, you have to close it, so the open one is going to kind of sound like that, where it's like closing. So again, this choke allows us to mimic that, because basically I can play an open hi-hat, and then when I play the closed one, it's almost as if it's actually closing immediately, just like a real hi-hat, but really it's just one sample playing and another one turning off. So that was how I did those hi-hats, and these are definitely like a very important stylistic thing, I think, here, so I wanted to cover those. But anyway, that's going to be it for today, guys. Make sure to let me know what you think of this video in the comments, and make sure to like this video, as well as subscribe. You can check out the sample pack from this video, as well as all of my socials in the description, and I'll see you guys again tomorrow with another tutorial.